Conversation at Landmarks Commission this morning. The Planning Commission and all of our boards or commissions are not box checking entities. The reason why you have people at the table is because discretion needs to be used on various matters. So we're not robots. So I think it's very important to be able to have the latitude to be able to review things broadly and make determinations, because we can see things through a lens that others may miss. So I don't think it should be except for anything.
Okay. Thank you. And again, so the director was reading from the recommendations from the previous commission. Certainly this body can make any recommendations.
Right.
If that is pretty all-encompassing.
Yeah.
That amendment, or the amendment that was recommended in 2008.
Right.
But is there anything that you don't feel the
That we should be seeing?
That is there an ordinance? Is there one example of anything we do as a city that has no business being in front of the planning commission? There has to be one, director.
That I've seen.
Give it to me.
I can't think of anything. Chris, can you think of anything, sir? Barbara?
Just for clarification, one of the reasons that this was put in here was for some of the public improvement contracts for replacing, let's say, carpeting in a department or something like that. Is that really something that needs to be funneled through the planning commission when you're doing, and that's what this was really directed towards, or those kinds of things?
So, Mr. Chairman, to Mrs. Langhammer, how we handle those that are kind of less important for us, we have a section on our agenda. Mr. Carey is very familiar with this, called administrative approvals. So those are things that come across my desk where I can look at and say, okay, and give a signature, and it's not up for debate in front of the entire commission. They see it on the agenda, they know that this was administratively approved, and we keep it moving.
Right. And again, this is not the seat that you're sitting in. This is
Sure.
for 10 years, and hopefully you'll be here for much more than that. But so in discussion with Horvath in his 43 years here, he has seen things stalled because of the mandatory referral. When I was there 2-3 weeks ago for a sewer district parking lot
Sure.
enhancement, and I saw the administrative referral and it wasn't discussed. I'm like, damn, why did it have to wait 2 weeks? I wanted it passed 2 weeks ago, right? And then $25 million in LED streetlights. I'm like, okay, they're gonna. Being the chair of public utilities, I thought I wanted this body to have some input in this because it hadn't come to the committee yet, and it was just what the heck did I come here for, right? So in application to me as a local council person, I saw it, and I'm curious, Councilman McCormick, and to our friends who have never been or have no idea, right? That was a $250,000 grant from the sewer district for a parking lot in Camps. And it got introduced on the floor of council on a Monday. My call on Tuesday to our clerk is, where's that piece? I got to get it moving. I got to talk to Councilman Johnson. I got to get it, I got to get this thing moving so I can sit down with the district and get the contract penned. Referred to planning. Next planning commission was 2 weeks later. I went up. It was just really read into the record, and then came back to council so we can go to committee. So it has some real world application, and I know director and director of law have. It might be necessary. It might be a piece of the puzzle, but maybe not on all of them, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think part of the conversation pertaining to this issue was efficiencies. So if there are specific ordinances or projects or whatever they might be that we're just going to put on the administrative review every time to reduce the amount of time it takes to go through the process at City Hall, does it make sense to just not require, and again, I don't know that I have a specific idea in my head right now of what that would be, but not require it to go to planning in order to make that process through City Hall more efficient, because every time we're going to see it, we're just going to, so that's a question, not a statement.
So to the chairman, to Mr. McCormick, that varies, right? And even determining what's relevant and what's not varies. So I think the way you can alleviate any issues is just real good communication. But again, understanding that this supersedes me and supersedes all of us, and that this is a charter, review, you know, this is not it, the way this is written. I can guarantee you that.
Right.
You know, so if in fact
application.
that road is driven down, we need to be very explicit. Just, this is not it about what those specific items may be, where you may have something that frequently comes across one's desk, you know, that may not require any real scrutiny, you know. But in the same vein, you know, there may be a lot missed by taking that posture as well. So,
Right, and in
Yeah.
application, Director, I know on a regular basis you sign off on things.
Oh, yeah,
to
we-
come back to
yes.
council administratively. So
Yes.
if someone were to request, if a council member or the administration would say, no, we need this now,
Yeah.
and the director of city planning, whoever is at that time, felt comfortable enough with the ordinance, they can sign it back to council to be heard. Not required to go to the full commission. Right.
Yep.
And right, so there is, in application, there are ways to circumvent any delay in progress. That's because you like me. What if it was Casey
Today.
asking for you to sign off? Then you'd have to reconsider. So I think the discussion and the considerations of 2008 was mandatory. You don't like to see anything that says mandatory, anything. But I'm sure through the hundreds of years, 19, however many years we've had the charter, Rachel, since forever.
1914.
Thank you.
This was 1942.
1942, they came up with something that said, we're never going to come up with the criteria to tackle every ordinance that
Right.
comes in.
Right.
Just send it all to them.
Right.
And then figure it out. Right? Which is not the world we live in today. But back then it was like, oh, let that man or woman figure it out.
Is there a way to codify in the charter some kind of guiding framework about the specific exceptions that should go to the planning commission in order to alleviate this sort of one or the other in terms of mandatory referral? Because imagine if you have an administration that does not have good communication with the council, where those relationships aren't really embedded and they're not seamless. What do you do in order to make sure that things in the city can still get done? And so I would agree with you that that word substantial would also scare me from a legislative intent perspective. But is there a way to put some more easier language that makes it more flexible for both the planning commission and the council to have a really good rubric or framework to kind of get these things done, but also make sure things get done in an efficient manner?
Thoughts,
So,
Director?
Chairman, I think that being a planner, I think there's a design solution for anything. So I think, yeah, the answer is yeah. I just think there needs to be some real aggressive thought put into what that means. But yes, I think the answer is yes. You
So
probably
it could be a
come
dollar
up with
value. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not on city council. I haven't had this issue come before me, but there's got to be a happy medium to say, okay,
Right.
what really merits this review?
This referral, right.
Yeah.
Dollar value is always thrown in there.
Yeah.
But you want, I mean, there's, $200,000 parking lot, so what are you gonna put, $250,000?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
could sure change a neighborhood with $250,000, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know if dollar value, I don't know if by department or, right, and
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One thing that makes me nervous about that is, we are in a space now where we want to take layers of complication out of processes because that really kills, efficiency. So sometimes the best way to handle that is through through discretion and communication. I know that sounds ambiguous, but for the most part, between council, I've been with the City Planning Commission 18 years. It's worked pretty well, and when you have stonewalling going on or there's some political disagreement going on, there's always these things that people are going to use processes to ensure that one's way is the way, So I don't think you can totally avoid that. I don't think so. But I think, us having the ability to move things quickly is really what's built in. The ability of a director to have an administrative sign off to go ahead and move something if it, to not allow it to go before planning commission if it's not really relevant. I think that's worked pretty well. I think that's a really good option. But it does not negate the fact that if you wanted to think it through, you and come up with criteria, you could, you know. But
Or
again,
even,
that's another layer.
Even include in the charter that administrative review, that there is a protocol for petitioning the director of city planning to sign off on it to get it back to council.
Sure.
You know, we could codify that. It's in here about, so they'd have 30 days, right? If they don't vote in 30 days, it's approved. If they disapprove, if the planning commission disapproves an ordinance, then it takes a supermajority of council to pass it. So there are some steps in there that have been, I think, pretty well thought out.
I think
right?
so.
But that part of, man, you know, director, if I don't get this, you know, the sewer district meets on Friday. And if I don't get this in front of finance by Monday, it's gone, right? And I'm thinking just solely as the councilman for Ward 17,
Right.
which there's only one of me, and I don't know how that applies or if you even want to hear me talk anymore. I probably wouldn't, but,
It just,
director, save me.
no, I understand what you're saying. I think we need to be mindful that the charter requires the commission to consider things. And historically, the administrative sign-off has been whatever authority the commission has given to the director, and it's not unlimited. It is historically been limited by whether that project has already been considered by the commission and they've expressed an opinion, and sometimes there are follow-up ordinances, like components being added. The director then has the authority to sign off there. But I just want to make sure you understand as we're talking this through, that if it's something new the commission has never seen before and it affects the lands of the city, the planning director is not going to, under the current protocol, have authority to just sign off on it.
Right.
So there are some limits on that administrative review.
Interesting. The only reason we're talking about it is because Horvath thought it was really important.
Yeah, no, it is a cumbersome, because the current language talks about anything that affects the plan or concerns the plan, design, character, extent, location, or use of any public improvement or public property or change thereof, you know, or concerning zoning. It's extraordinarily
job.
broad language, and the thinking last time was really geared towards those projects that you see sometimes on the administrative review, repaving of a parking lot. I mean, generally, I don't think the commission's going to have much to say about that. And that's what it was trying to get at,
Right.
is maintenance-type projects that really don't affect the outside plan of the city, or as we said, the inside of a public building. If we have to let a public improvement contractor rehab the inside of a public building, that generally isn't something the planning commission addresses, the inside of buildings.
So, I'm looking for any recommendations or not as to the previous discussion regarding the mandatory referral, section 76.3. I would agree with the director that the recommendations from 2008 aren't as clean as I would put in front of the voters of the city of Cleveland personally. And it would, in many ways, I think, dampen or hamper the good work of the planning commission in some instances. But I can't come up with the language that wouldn't do that. Director.
Perhaps we could ask the planning director and his staff to take a look at the ordinances that have come through, say, you know, and it may well be referring to your administrative approval list, to see if we can get a more concrete example for members of the commission.
Yeah.
And that may be more helpful in thinking this through, because we have a lot of folks who don't deal with this on a regular basis. And so maybe if we have some concrete examples of the types of things that may seem to, the commission may not seem to have to address, that it might be more helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, Director, if you
Okay.
wouldn't mind doing that.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get to a vote on this section today, but if you could put some thought in and maybe get some data back to us.
Sure. The one thing that
about the-
sticks, I'm sorry, go
No, go
ahead.
ahead.
The one thing that sticks out, Chairman, to the the rest of the board is the interior conversation about things that may impact the interior of buildings, which we typically don't weigh in heavily on in many cases. But, you know, in the advent of sustainable development, you know, these interior spaces actually do affect what's happening on the outside of the building. So there's a lot to consider with this, but we'll take a look at it. But if we do come up with something, it will probably be, and I'm just letting you know, very narrow with respect to the specific things that I would think could actually be off the table for us to review.
Or a more streamlined process, or get
Yeah.
rid of the word mandatory, so, you know, Horvath feels like his 43 years here, actually,
I don't know that he would advocate for that.
Yeah, mandatory.
never know, Director. So I appreciate the discussion. If you could get some feedback back
Sure.
to the commission, we'll share it with everybody, and this probably won't be the last time we talk about it. But
Yep.
before you go, and I hope that the director has been provided, we got some anonymous recommendations
Oh, boy.
for the commission to consider. It was the second page that was handed out to everybody. I don't know if there's an extra one, Alan, to give to the director. But the first one, and I had a hard time with this, Rachel, and maybe you can help me, but it's page 9, the 2008 recommendation number 57, which is in the packet, page 9 of 12, which the way I read it meant that this person wanted to get rid of the local design review committees, because, so, section 76.4, coordinating board and advisory committee,
Yep.
right?
Got it.
That,
Thank you.
we don't do it that way anyhow. We do it by way of local design review, which make recommendations to the commission.
In advance,
right?
yes.
So when it said coordinating board and advisory committee repealed, I think that whoever the anonymous is thought if we get rid of 76.4, then we wouldn't have local design review committees.
That's
They
not
were
the
wrong.
case.
You read it, Rachel?
I didn't understand what I was reading, actually. But my thought was, well, we do want to repeal 76-4 because this is not the way we do
Do
it
business.
anymore. And so the recommendation to repeal it, I think, still is valid. And I just didn't understand what the
Impetus,
anonymous
well,
was giving.
I think they had a beef with the local design review. And, I mean, Tom, you would know this a heck of a lot more than a lot of us, but I find them to be very useful and add value. I think,
Yes.
and they're not here, so we don't have the ability to ask the submission person questions, but I took
I
it
don't
to
think
read
so.
that exactly. 76.4, repeal it, and then we get rid of the local design review committees, which make either developers do things differently, churches do things differently, building in a house, they make recommendations to the planning commission that you should make it brick instead of wood to be consistent.
Just a point of clarification, and Freddie, maybe you know, the local design review advisory committees, do you know the authority under which they're appointed? Is it this provision in here for advisory committees appointed? Is that the authority you use for those groups?
So my understanding, Mr. Chairman, to Director Lang Henry, is that first I'm going to give you the rationale for why design review at the local level was established. So one, the majority of the individuals who are on the local design review committee are design professionals, okay, architects, but also included are residents. The thinking around that is that most people have to live with development decisions that take place in their neighborhoods. The Design Review Advisory Committee gives a body within that locality the ability to influence the actual planning commission. So rather than have sort of a top-down coordinating board, it made more sense to go from the ground up and to have local folks begin to advise the planning commission on issues of development and design in their particular communities.
Right.
So that was the spirit of it. And if you ask me, I think it works extremely well. Now, when you have to go through the process and it doesn't come out your way, it's easy to get people who think the process stinks because they didn't get what they want. But when it works out for them, they're great. You know, it's the best thing in the world. So that's just part of the nature of the beast. So
And again, it is advisory to.
they're advisory, yes. They don't have any absolute authority to say
To
yes or
Director
no.
Langhenry's question, I mean, they were established by ordinance.
Yes.
Were they, I just don't know.
I remember because we changed the names, or we changed the boundaries a couple of years ago, and I know
Okay.
there was an ordinance that went through.
Yeah, we have a copy
Councilman
of that
Johnson's,
ordinance we can
yeah.
provide.
So I think it's established by ordinance.
So
even
that answers the
repealing-
question.
Even repealing 76-4 does not affect the local design
Review
review
committees.
advisory committee.
Yes.
And to my colleagues who don't, again, live in this world, it's advisory to the planning commission. So if you have a beef with their color scheme on your house, you go to the planning commission and said, I want it this way, even though they wanted it that way.
Right.
Right? So they're not an end all. If you have a, Tom, I mean, what's your experience with
correct.
the, what is it, Near West?
The Ohio City Design Review Committee.
Okay.
I think that they do add a lot of value. I believe that ordinance lives within the Landmarks Ordinance, is where you find the appointing powers of that, and I believe it is through the Landmarks Commission that has the ability to appoint members to local committees. I think that they function very well. I would certainly not want to remove them from existence. I do think that sometimes, and again, this is not part of the charter, so I don't believe it'll be our purview. I think that sometimes there is confusion created because it's another layer, right? It's like,
Right.
and that is confusing for the applicant because they come in and say, here's what I want to do. They get a recommendation, because that's all it is, that goes to either Landmarks or Planning Commission, which then goes up to that deciding body. And so sometimes you have Landmarks or Planning will give conflicting advice to an applicant than that they got, so you're getting multiple layers of people giving advice, which isn't always consistent. And I do think that there are ways to make that better, but again, I think that would be through the Landmarks Ordinance, not through the charter.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, can I give an analogy just to clarify sort of the process and how it works? Because it can seem complex, but it's really not, right? And we have, and I think I shared this during the budget hearings, of every one of the processes that we touch, and it's a box by box, step by step layout of each one of those processes. You think of a development project as a raw steak, right? When that steak, before you can actually eat it, you know, you have to marinate it, you have to cook it, you have to season it, you have to put it in the oven, right? Each step in the process is to make sure that by the time that thing gets to the planning commission, that it's edible. That's what this is about. All right, so there's this filtering that gets us to something decent on the ground. Absent that filtering, you can see some very bad stuff. And there's some examples of some very bad stuff that we can share with you pictorially that will make you celebrate design review, right? So it's necessary in order to make sure that development projects come out on the back end like they need to come out from the time a permit is submitted to the time something gets built.
I think, yes.
I have a question. Can we expand the powers of these folks, like these advisory commissions, if they're in these communities, say the standard for development, can we expand their powers to, they can set the standard for what's going on in the communities right there? And they can give some recommendations and be proactive?
Of the local advisory committees?
Yes.
I don't think we can in the charter. I think because it's not in it's established by either through landmarks,
Yep.
but by ordinance. So, but I can see your point is well taken. But each of these local design review advisory committees are different and unique. So to empower them with something else, I don't know.
That will create layers.
That would be the layers that I think would be. People don't like it. A lot of people who don't do work regularly in the city think it's a waste of their time. They have to in the far west. They go to the basement of St. Mel's at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday and tell a group of people what they're trying to do and then get feedback, right? So if it's a, what did you have? Did you have one recently? It was CubeSmart.
Yeah, keep
Right?
smart.
So this team of professionals tried to add value, and just by way of example, they didn't take kindly to their input. I think that's where this anonymous recommendation came from. but not that specific, but somebody who lived in that world. In a nutshell, I mean, really, I think this is a healthy and spirited
No, they
discussion.
wanna eat it
but
raw.
at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with this recommendation. With repealing 76-4. And they're not here to further elaborate on it to me, but I took it to read they wanted to blow up local design review, but that's not from this ordinance. So I guess I'm looking for a recommendation. Either do we want to repeal 76.4 because we don't do that anymore, right?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
But it's not going to give the submitter, the person that asked for it, what they want.
No.
I am not hearing a recommendation. I am not hearing a motion.
Yeah, I think we'll pass on that one.
We're taking passes on this one for further discussion at a later date. But in full transparency, in open, good government, they also made a second recommendation, the anonymous submitter, which is to delete that the 5 members appointed by the mayor shall include 1 attorney and 1 real estate and real estate developer professional from the language. And also replace that the chairman of the board shall be appointed annually by the mayor. 2, the chairman of the board shall be elected annually by the members of the board and the vice chair. Rachel, I know you read this and thought about it. Care to?
This is a discussion
BZA.
of the recommendation, number 58,
BZA.
which goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Oh, it is the
BZA.
BZA.
It's
So we're
Yeah, it's
gonna ask them.
BZA, and I guess Ms. or Mr. Anonymous wants to delete this sentence in the 2008 recommendation. So the thing is, the 2008 recommendation hasn't been offered since 2008. So, I mean, it's not before us, so there's nothing to discuss unless you want to discuss this particular additional language from 2008.
And it's to the BZA, so they're coming up next.
Yeah.
So I forgot. Anything further for our Director of City Planning or Assistant Director of City Planning as it pertains to the Charter Review Commission of 2018? Yes,
One
Director
thing.
Lang.
There had been a recommendation in 2008 concerning the 76-1, the director and staff of the Planning Commission. And the current reading says that the planning director shall be nominated by the commission and appointed by the mayor.
Okay.
And then it goes on to say that the staff, the commission shall appoint its staff. It doesn't really work that way, and the recommendation had been that the planning director was appointed by the mayor and served at the pleasure of the mayor, and that the staff was appointed by the planning director, which reflects more how it operates at this time. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. Freddie?
No, Mr. Chairman, I thought that at the end of the day, the mayor decides that he wants me gone, I'm gone. So I don't have a position really on this one,
So this is
to
both
be honest.
54 and 55, Director?
Yes, they both of them, I mean, they both address 76-1.
And with respect to staff, I think it's absolutely necessary that the planning director appoints the team necessary to carry out the wishes of the administration and the council and the commission.
But the mayor signs off on every
Absolutely.
hire. I mean, even for you, right, Director Langer, in law, you interview and you make the recommendation to the mayor, but the mayor is the ultimate appointing authority.
Well, under the charter, it is the commissioners with the approval of directors, but our hiring process includes sign off by the mayor, but directors are appointed by the mayor. But regular staff, there's a section of the charter that addresses who the appointing authorities are. But for directors, the appointing authority is the mayor.
Any discussion, Tom?
I'm sorry, but in 76-1, does that actually, is the way I'm reading it, is it the commission members who
Nominate.
appoint the staff? Is
It-
that the way it's reading?
The way it reads is, upon nomination of the planning director, the commission shall appoint. Yes, that's what
The
it
staff?
says. Yes, that's what it says.
And-
And the reality is that it just doesn't really occur that way.
No.
It should, yes.
It doesn't,
The commission doesn't appoint,
Right.
so the way
Yeah.
76-1 directors and staff reads is that there shall be a planning director, and they've been nominated by the commission, the planning commission, appointed by the mayor at the mayor's discretion. And then staff by the commission members.
Right, so, Mr. Chairman, it's almost if the 7-member planning commission, how this reads, would appoint every member of our 29 staff.
Employees.
Yeah. I don't know how that would work, how that would work.
And I don't know if it's ever worked that
No.
way.